Alright, Star Wars fans, it's time for some tough love. Today we're talking about the Acolyte, the Disney Plus series that some fans ignored, others hated, and a handful of us actually thought was pretty damn good. Now I get it, the Acolyte isn't perfect. It's got pacing issues, some controversial moments, and oh yeah, the lead actress had some words for a certain part of the fandom that didn't exactly help the show's reputation.
Well, I mean, white people crying actually was the goal.
But despite all that, I think it does deserve a second chance. So, in this video, we're going to be breaking it all down. What worked, what didn't, the so-called plot holes, and why a Season 2 could be amazing, and of course the cold, hard financial reality of why it probably won't happen. So let's dive in. Let's start with the Acolyte, and what it actually gave us in Season 1. Set during the end of the High Republic era, about 100 years before the Phantom Menace, the show explores a time when the Jedi were at their peak. Think of them as like the galaxy's overconfident golden boys.
I've been arrogant.
It's your police department strutting around with their lightsabers and moral superiority like they own the place. That arrogance is part of what gets them out of so much trouble.
I'm keeping this internal for the moment.
Now, our story follows Sol, a Jedi Master investigating a series of mysterious murders, only to discover that his old Padawan Osha is alive and connected to her twin sister May, a dark side powerhouse born of a Night Sister ritual. And if you're thinking, wow, that sounds messy, you're absolutely right. First off, Lee Jung-jae as Sol, phenomenal. This guy gave us one of the best performances in modern Star Wars. Not to mention, he learned English just to play this show.
What?
There's a scene in episode 6 where he processes his grief with nothing but his face, no music, no dialogue, and it's more powerful than some entire Star Wars movies. Then there's Amandla Stenberg, who pulls double duty as Osha and May. She does a solid job making these two characters feel distinct, even as their paths of light and dark intertwine. And Manny Jacinto as the Stranger, aka Kamir, delivers one of the most chilling Sith performances we've seen in years. This guy is all about freedom through chaos, and he's terrifyingly good at it. He is possibly one of the best Siths we've ever seen on TV. On top of that, the action is some of the best we've had in Star Wars recently. Lightsaber duels inspired by Laia's swordsmanship, brutal hand-to-hand combat, and even some force field fights that had me yelling at my screen.
We're not live.
It's like watching John Wick, but with lightsabers. Of course, no Star Wars show is complete without the fandom nitpicking it to death, and the Acolyte is no exception. Let's talk about the so-called plot holes that have been making the rounds. First on the list, there's outrage over Ki-Adi-Mundi showing up, because apparently he's supposed to be too young. According to a 1999 Episode 1 CD-ROM, he was born in 93 BBY, before the Battle of Yavin. But here's the thing, that's from Legends.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
When Disney reset the canon in 2014, that timeline got tossed out like a bad batch of blue milk. It's all been reset. The expanded universe is no longer canon. You could consider it George Lucas canon, but unfortunately, that's just fandom nonsense. Disney owns Star Wars now. That's what's canon. So unless you're clinging to outdated CD-ROM trivia, Ki-Adi-Mundi's appearance is fair game. And honestly, his giant head being there didn't bother me half as much as some of the other actual issues people could focus on. Next, we've got Osha and May, who were created through a Night Sister Force ritual. Some fans are crying foul, saying only Anakin was born of the Force, and to that I say relax. Anakin was created directly by the Force, as the chosen one. Osha and May, they're the result of Night Sisters messing around with dark side magic. If you're cool with the Mortis arc from the Clone Wars, where the Force has literal avatars representing light and dark, then this isn't a stretch. Get over yourself. And finally, let's talk about Yoda. Some people think it's a plot hole that he didn't react more strongly to the Jedi's deaths, but come on, it's Yoda. He's not about to hop on a space Zoom call and scream, "The Sith are back!" Yoda senses danger, but he's patient. He's not going to jump to conclusions without proof, which aligns perfectly with his character in the prequels. It's not a plot hole, it's restraint. Oh, and then there's also Chimera, who lets Sol live. Chimera's an interesting character, and I think this just adds to more of the interestingness to him. It's not confirmed, but we can assume that Plagueis is his master. This Chimera is essentially the Sith before Palpatine and the rule of two.
Always two there are. No more, no less.
I could totally see this leading into why Chimera dies. You know, maybe Plagueis kills Chimera, because he allowed a Jedi to live. Or maybe Chimera and Osha go on and train to become two and attempt to take on Plagueis, and we all know how that will work out. There's no telling what would happen, but for us to just jump to conclusions and be like, oh, he's a terrible Sith, you let him live after seeing his face, and blah, 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 blah. It's just an interesting aspect to me. I think this could be more explored in this season 2. It's a perfect opportunity to expand, rather than just jump to conclusions and say, this was the worst thing that ever happened. Now, let's talk about why the Acolyte deserves a second season. This is the first live-action exploration of the High Republic. A second season could dive even deeper into the Jedi's flaws and the Sith's rise, bridging the gap between the Phantom Menace. This is, it's really great to point this out. A lot of people like the Darth Plagueis comic book from the expanded universe. It's not canon anymore, but it's a great bridge between the Phantom Menace and the High Republic era. We didn't give the Acolyte a chance to show that. We just jumped straight to conclusions. Why don't we give it a chance before we just jump there? What happens to Osha and May? What's the Stranger's endgame? And how does this all tie into the bigger picture of Star Wars? There's so much left to explore. Here's the problem. The Acolyte flopped in viewership. With just 370 million minutes watched in the first 3 episodes and a whopping $9.28 cost per view, it's Disney's most expensive Star Wars show by far. For comparison, The Mandalorian cost $2.02 per view. That's a tough sell for a second season. And we can't ignore the bantha in the room. Amanda's comments about the non-woke fan base. Look, I get it. Star Wars has always been political, but going after a chunk of your audience? Not a great move when your show is already struggling to find viewers. So here's where we stand. The Acolyte is bold, ambitious, and packed with potential. But between the lower viewership numbers, high production costs, and some PR missteps, a second season might not happen. What do you think? Does the Acolyte deserve another shot? Or should Disney cut its losses? Am I just another shill who needs to get off the internet? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and join me next time here on Holocron Crypt, where we dig into the deepest corners of the Star Wars galaxy.